Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for almost 25 years. I started during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was on disability. My life had stopped. And happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tools and techniques as a way of dealing with what I was going through. And I had absolutely no confidence in this. I was not impressed with his suggestion and only did it because it was all he gave me at first. And I figured, okay, I'm going to try this just long enough that I can go back to him and say, look, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And as I say, that was 24 years ago, and I never had that conversation with him. And I'm still practicing. I'm teaching. And here I am. And here you are. And thank you for being with me. Today is the next in our ongoing series of calming anxiety by living mindfully. And I will start off today's sitting with a quick story about something that same therapist said in a day retreat that I went to a number of years after we had started working together. Now let's jump in. I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head. As a cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. If we're experiencing some tension right now, that's fine. Absolutely fine. In my experience, when we try to get rid of tension, we do so by bringing more tension to the tension. Not very skillful, not very effective. We can allow the tension to simply be here and simply leave in its own time, which may or may not be today. And I also like to notice what is beneath me. A cushion, a chair, floor. Something is supporting me, holding me up. There's a sense of grounding. Now let's take a moment and notice that grounding or support beneath us. And the suspension from the ceiling, from the top. And whatever else we have in between for us right now. However it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And as we do so, we may begin to shape or control our breathing because we think it needs to be a certain way in our practice. Or perhaps we simply always start controlling and shaping the breathing when we bring our attention to it. It's very common. Nothing wrong with it. But we don't have to. I find it very helpful to simply observe the breathing as it is. Long or short, deep or shallow, pleasant or unpleasant. An interesting thing about working with the breathing in this way, where we're not trying to make it be a certain way, it's a way of directly working with the don't know mind. As I mentioned, I'd have a short story about the therapist who got me started in this practice. On a day retreat that I participated in, someone asked him a question about a particular circumstance or line of thinking that was causing some difficulty. And my therapist helped him break down the sequence of thoughts that made up this line of thinking. And he took it step by step, says, okay, what's the first thought? And then what thought does that lead to? And what does that lead to? And this went on for a few steps. And then they came to a juncture where there seemed to be kind of this disconnect between two of the thoughts. Like they didn't just flow together quite as neatly as the other ones. And my therapist zeroed in on that. He says to the guy, so this thought and that thought, what's happening in between those? What's linking those thoughts? And the guy stopped for a moment, paused, thought. Finally says, I don't know. My therapist said, stay there. Stay there in the don't know. So much of our fear, our anxiety, comes from that uncertainty. And it's, in my experience, not even so much uncertainty about what might happen. Uncertainty about how things are going to go. I mean, that's what we normally picture, what we normally think about. But when I started to really work with that, I noticed it's not really about that. It's more about the uncertainty of how I'm going to feel about what happens. How I will feel when things go the way they go. Will I be okay? Will I be able to handle this? Will I be overwhelmed? And we try to answer those questions because we don't know the answer. Because, well, they haven't happened yet, if they're going to happen at all. And how do we try to answer those questions? Well, by trying to make sure we'll be prepared. Trying to make sure we'll be okay, no matter what. Which means what? Well, we have to keep picturing the worst things that might happen and imagine how we'll feel as they're happening. And we generally don't like the answer that we get when we're trying that, so we try again. And of course, that's really just making us miserable in the present. It's an unskillful line of thinking. It causes our own suffering. If we can open up to the don't know mind, begin to approach uncertainty. The feeling of uncertainty itself. Without trying to force it away like tension. Without trying to answer the unanswerable. We find that we don't know the don't know mind. We've never given ourselves a chance to know it. And we can work with the don't know mind just with the breathing. Noticing the breathing, however it is. We don't know what the next breath will be like. Fact is, we never really know anyway. What matters is how do we approach that don't know. Can we maybe allow it to be don't know, even just for a moment, even for one breath. It's all we ever have is this one breath anyway. We can approach the don't know with fear or curiosity. With fear, we try to shut it down, try to get all the answers in advance, in the way that I described a few moments ago. But when we approach it with curiosity, well, now we're opening up. We're admitting, yes, I don't know. So, let's find out what's actually here. And these tend to form cycles. The fear cycle we continue to try shutting down, again, the way I described a few moments ago. But the curiosity, that also creates a cycle. As we start to finally see things that we were not open to before. Sometimes we're surprised what we find. And we also start to gain some familiarity with the don't know. We start to know. And just like with the fear cycle, that curiosity cycle builds upon itself. The more familiarity we gain, the more comfortable we are with continuing to check it out. And the more we find, the more we become open to finding what else there is. And there's no need to try to force that. I find it will come naturally. If we simply start with what we have here now, the breathing. If I don't try to change what the next breath will be like, what will it be like? I don't know. If I do try to control and shape the next breath, what will it be like? I don't know that either. But I find that trying to force it to be a certain way is kind of a closing down. Allowing it to be however it will be is an opening up. As we gain practice with opening to the don't know mind, we find that each individual scenario that we might be concerned about starts to become a little less scary. Not because we've somehow addressed each of those scenarios in advance, but because we have addressed the common underlying issue behind the real fear there, where it's actually coming from, not from the scenarios. From the not knowing how we're going to feel. And we're never going to know how we're going to feel. The best we can do is checking in on how we feel now. We might not even know that. And that's okay too. We can open to that in real time with curiosity. As we simply bring awareness to how we are feeling now and get more familiar with that, that'll take care of all of these laters. Because what are these laters but just nows that haven't happened yet? If we can allow some don't know in the now, we just keep doing that. That's actually all we have to do. It's almost too simple. Not easy. Definitely not easy. But simple. So as you go through the rest of your day, you may notice where's the don't know? And can I make a little room for that? A little space for that? Can that be here? I mean, it's going to be here anyway. So, how can I most skillfully relate to it? And if you're anything like me, you may also be surprised by what you find. Thank you, everyone. I'll be hanging on here for a few moments and we'll grab a look at the chat if anybody has anything that they would like to share or ask. Wow, very active chat today. Let's see how much we can get to. Yeah, Chris, getting overwhelmed about the prospect of being overwhelmed. It's one of those begetting things. I often talk about how emotions beget themselves. We don't just feel sad. We feel sad about feeling sad. We feel angry about feeling angry. We feel happy about feeling happy. Feel anxious about feeling anxiety. My whole issue was I felt panic about panic. We feel overwhelmed about possibly feeling overwhelmed. So we take that possibility of feeling overwhelmed and turn it into an actuality of feeling overwhelmed. This is classic. I mean, this is Buddhism 101. How are we creating our own suffering? That's a perfect example. We get a thought, an image of a possible future. May or may not happen. And regardless of whether it does happen that way, we cause ourselves misery now. That's a perfect summation of how I ended up housebound and on disability. It's really quite that simple. So we want to find ways of dealing with thoughts, feelings, in a skillful way so that we are not causing ourselves suffering. We may experience pain. In fact, we're going to experience pain at some point or another. But how we approach that, whether it's with fear or curiosity, say, determines whether we're going to experience suffering. Yeah, Farnaz, feel so nervous it makes me tense. There's a mind-body cycle right there. We feel nervous or anxious, which we think of as this mental or emotional component. And then there's the bodily reaction, this tension that arises, which is why I say, if there's tension there, let it process. Don't try to get rid of it, because then we're just adding more tension to tension. And what does that do? Well, that confirms for the mind that there's a real problem here and increases the nervousness and anxiety. We get that mind-body cycle, that loop, that feedback loop. So if there's a process here, I've found that fighting with that process perpetuates it. If we can notice the components of the process as they are and how they interrelate, how they feed back upon each other. This is another example of opening to this process that maybe we don't know. Opening to it with curiosity and allowing it to process rather than trying to shut it out, which ironically perpetuates it. It makes it worse, in my experience. Ren, thank you for sharing. I'm sorry to hear about the challenges that you have and that you have coming up family-wise, as well as during the time that I was housebound. Yeah, it's extremely difficult to deal with so much, really. I feel for what you're saying. It's difficult when people don't know, or people do know, they don't understand. I found that it's really a matter of focusing on what we need. You may not be in a place right now where you have the capacity, the energy to meet other people's expectations, such that if you even tried to, it would not be skillful. It would not be helpful. I find that we really need to focus inward in times like that. We need to listen to ourselves. Nobody knows what's right for us except for us. Sometimes even we don't know what is right for us. And in those times, we need to listen even more carefully. So I'm glad today's topic resonated for you. And I hope you'll be able to continue to work with it in a way that will be sustainable and helpful, particularly when you're dealing with extra challenges on top of anxiety and agoraphobia, which I know when you have those, you don't need any extra challenges. You've got enough challenges. So I'm glad today's talk resonated for you. Yeah, Chris, the future not being as bad as one anticipates. It usually isn't. And it also, in a sense, doesn't even matter if it is. We're still making ourselves miserable in the present now, which isn't really going to change that. We still think we're going to get something out of doing it, that we'll be more prepared, right? We've run through it so many times in our mind. It's like we've gotten ready for it. We're kind of inoculated against it because we've already experienced it. Oh, okay, I've felt the worst because I keep thinking about it. So if the worst happens, I'm ready. Okay. So what we're saying is, even if I experience this pain in the future the way that I think I will, or that I'm afraid I will, I'm still going to cause myself unnecessary suffering now because that's going to help somehow. Okay. Does it really? No, not really. It just kind of drains us in my experience. It takes that short moment of pain that we may experience and drags it out into this long road of suffering. And then sometimes we fall into the trap of afterwards thinking, oh, that wasn't so bad. Maybe because I prepared myself so well. So what happens next time we're anticipating something painful? We do it all again. And we just continue to make ourselves miserable. This is what the Buddha is talking about with delusion, this unclear seeing, these storylines, and cause all this suffering. Because we are trying to accomplish something, in this case, avoid something, in a way that is not skillful. Yep, Ron, yeah, exactly, feeling panic about feeling panic. Yeah. And again, I found that it was the fear-based reaction to feeling panic about feeling panic that caused so many issues. It was that trying to control it, trying to shut it down. The last thing I wanted to do was experience panic. And yet, when I opened up to it with a don't know mind, the cycle fell apart. Because I was no longer perpetuating it. When it became acceptable to experience sensations of panic, suddenly there wasn't an issue anymore. It was all self-generated. Chris saying, I don't actually so much open to it as watch it at a distance. I don't engage. I would say watching at a distance is an engagement. Maybe not an engagement in the sense of getting in the middle of it. But it's still a relationship to it. It's a relationship with it. We're always engaging with it in some way, even if that engagement is some kind of trying not to engage. Watching at a distance is very helpful, very useful. That's in some ways what I'm advocating with the breathing. We're just watching, seeing what happens, not interfering. But in a way that could be interfering, right? Because if we're used to trying to control the breathing, and now we are not controlling the breathing, we're interfering with our interference, right? So I wouldn't say you're not engaging. I would say it's a style of engagement. Very often a very skillful style of engagement. Jesse, yeah. Resistance causing much of your anxiety. Absolutely. Absolutely. You might like a session that I have here on Insight Timer as well as on the YouTube channel called Unlocking Acceptance. It's all about resistance. You might enjoy that session. You see, the need to control and predict outcomes has been my enemy. I try not to engage too much in these battle motifs, especially with myself. We want to control and predict outcomes because we want to be safe. We want to be okay. And there's that part of our lizard brain that is sending out these messages because, our subconscious minds and bodies still think we're out on the African savannah 50,000 years ago with a saber-toothed tiger around the corner. So it's trying to keep us safe. Trying to demonize that or consider it an enemy or squelch it or destroy it or what have you. I find that's not only not helpful, it's not necessary. In fact, it's kind of not possible. It's another voice at our internal conference table that's simply trying to help. And I've found that in time, allowing it to say its piece, listening, not necessarily always doing what it wants me to do, because it doesn't know best. It's trying to help, just not in the most skillful way. It has a limited vantage point. But in time, I find I can even offer gratitude to that voice. Because again, it's trying to help. It's not against me. It's on my side. It's saying, hey, watch out. We want to make sure we're okay. Like, I hear you. We are okay. But I see where you're coming from. And thank you for trying the best way you know how. The first insight I ever had in this practice was if you fight yourself, you've already lost. So I try to reframe these things so they're not always using that battle motif that we so quickly usually default to. Yeah, and Farnaz says right here about trying to, being taught to fight the bad things. Yeah, you say it right there. That's exactly it. And that's just it. We are taught to fight, right? We frame so much of it, whether it's the war on drugs or battling sickness or anything in the political realm, a political showdown. I mean, everything is some kind of battle motif, isn't it? There's got to be a winner. There's got to be a loser. So, of course, when there's something within us we don't like, what do? We go to the battle motif. We start fighting ourselves. And then we wonder why we're exhausted and miserable. So I find that reframing so that we're not using that kind of framework, that kind of paradigm, I find it really helpful to get away from that. Ren, exactly. Stuck in the cycle of anxiety because we fight it every time. We try to shut it down because we don't want to feel uncomfortable. That's exactly it. That's the irony, is by fighting discomfort, we generate discomfort. One of my other early insights was comfort is just that thing you feel after discomfort. We can't always feel comfortable. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way. If you want to feel comfortable, the best way I have found to do that is to do something uncomfortable. Comfort's that thing you're going to feel afterwards. Jesse, not identifying with the emotion, instead examining it. That's exactly it. Yeah. Gaining some space so that we're seeing it's not us. It's not us. It's a process. What happens when we don't identify with it, but simply see it as the process that it is? As I often say, think of the difference between I am angry versus I feel anger versus there is anger versus there are sensations that are associated with anger. Each one of these gaining some space, some distance, unraveling that identification. Yeah, Ren, like masochists tormenting ourselves with thoughts. Not with bad intention. We're doing it because we're trying to avoid pain. We're just not doing it skillfully. And we're not seeing how unskillful it is, so we keep trying, and we keep doing it again and again and again. And it just feeds on itself. That's why we need a practice like this where we develop clear seeing and say, oh, holy crap, look what I'm doing. This sucks. Yeah, this really sucks. Maybe I should, try something different. Let me try not that. And that's what this is here. Let's stop trying to get away from the don't know, which is well-intended. We're trying to stay safe. We're trying to stay comfortable, right? But how's it working out? Oh, shit. Not so good. So what happens if we try something different? What happens if we approach it and see what it's about? Oh, wow. Very different results, very, very different effects. Yeah, Farnaz, I often say that this practice will give you everything if you ask nothing of it. And that when we decide where our practice must go, we miss where our practice could go. None of us have gotten to the place where we're at now overnight. And unraveling it and reversing some of these cycles won't happen overnight either. But with persistence, compassionate persistence. The same way water eventually wears down rock. We keep setting the causes and conditions in place. And effects have to happen. Jesse, approaching the voice with loving kindness versus resentment. Love that. Yeah, I'm glad that resonated. It was a huge breakthrough for me. That recognition that I don't have to kill off a part of myself as if I could anyway. And realizing we're all on the same side. I say all, I mean, it's all just me anyway, right? So of course we're on the same side. And again, the paradox is as we stop resisting the voices that we think we need to get rid of, they become less of an issue. Not because they're an issue, but because our resistance to them was the issue. What we think is the problem is rarely what's actually the problem. Are those voices the problem? No. How we're relating to them is the problem. Yeah, Chris, at the end here, compassionate persistence. Maybe let's take that with us off the cushion today. Maybe that'll be something we can take with us today, is opening to the don't know with compassionate persistence. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And I hope to see you all again real soon. Thank you all so much, everybody. Cheers.